I never believed in ghosts until I discovered what had been living in the walls of my childhood home. That night started like any other, the kind that feels ordinary enough to fade into memory. But it was anything but. The wind pressed against the windows like it had a voice, the kind that whispers just beyond comprehension. And the floorboards groaned under the weight of silence. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. Not really. There's a peculiar terror in realizing that the world you trust, the house you grew up in, could conceal things you were never meant to see. I remember staring at the hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, and feeling the walls themselves breathing. Alive, patient, waiting. It's the kind of moment that makes your rational mind scramble for excuses. Old pipes, drafts, your imagination. Yet deep down, I knew this wasn't imagination. Not anymore. Some stories refuse to die. They linger, hiding in corners, beneath floorboards, behind doors you never open. And some stories hide worse secrets, secrets that scream when the lights go out, secrets that were never meant for the living. That night, I glimpsed one of those secrets. And once you see them, even in fragments, the ordinary world loses its safety. You can't unsee what's been alive in the dark. Over the years, I've pieced together 10 of the most terrifying true stories I've ever encountered, stories whispered in towns abandoned long ago, in rooms where the air itself feels wrong, in houses where laughter once lived, and now only shadows remain. I never believed in ghosts before that night. But now I know they're not just tales. They are waiting, and sometimes they watch. If you continue listening, you'll learn what I've discovered. But be warned. Some of these stories contain truths I was never supposed to know, and they will follow you long after the last word. Story 1. The Silent Attic. I had always avoided the attic. In a 120-year-old house like mine, every corner carries whispers of the past. But the attic carried a silence that pressed against the walls. It wasn't empty. I could feel it. My curiosity, though, outweighed caution that evening, and I found myself tugging at the heavy, dust-choked door. The hinges groaned like a warning, but I ignored it. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. A smell so sharp it clawed at my throat. Light from my flashlight barely touched the corners. And that's when I heard it. The faintest whisper, almost like someone calling my name, Tessu, though no one else was there. The floorboards creaked under every step, and I swore I could feel eyes tracing me from the shadows. In the corner, stacked haphazardly beneath an old tarpaulin, I found a small journal, brittle and yellowed. Flipping it open, I read fragments of entries left by a family that once lived here. We hear them at night, moving between the beams. Something watches when we sleep. Don't go to the attic. The ink was smudged, as if tears, or something else, had been shed over these words. I froze when a cold draft swept past me, carrying a faint, metallic scent. The whispers returned, overlapping, urgent, pleading, or was it mocking? I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, and for a split second, a figure shimmered at the edge of the beam. Tall, thin, and impossibly still. The moment it should have solidified, it vanished, leaving only the echo of silence behind. I bolted from the attic that night, heart hammering, journal clutched in my hands. Yet, even in the safety of my bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still there, lurking just beyond the threshold of sight. Little did I know, the attic was only the beginning. Story 2. The Phantom Passenger. I boarded the late-night train with the tired resignation of someone used to solitude, expecting nothing more than the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks to lull me into forgetfulness. The carriage was nearly empty, dim lights casting long, wavering shadows across the worn seats. Then I saw him. Or perhaps it saw me. He appeared without a sound, sliding into the seat across from me, as though the empty air had folded into shape. Pale, almost translucent, his eyes held a sorrow I couldn't place. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice soft but carrying an unnatural weight, like the whisper of a century-old secret brushing against my skin. I tried to reply, but my words died in my throat. Instead, I listened as he began recounting events from over 100 years ago. A murder on this very train, a stolen child, a letter never delivered. The details were precise, too precise. He spoke of streets I had walked, of rooms I had slept in, as if he knew me in ways I had never shared. Each word was a finger pressing against the fragile line between reality and nightmare. The carriage seemed to stretch unnaturally. The overhead lights flickered in rhythm with his tale. Somewhere in the distance, the train shrieked against the rails, echoing the sharp pangs of dread coiling in my chest. I wanted to look away, to pretend he wasn't there, but I couldn't. Something in the way he leaned forward, the slight tremor in his hands, demanded my attention. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. No trace, no ripple, only the faint smell of iron and old wood lingering where he had been. The echo of his words stayed with me, clawing at my thoughts. A reminder that the supernatural doesn't wait for permission. It finds you in the quietest moments, when you least expect it. If you think that was unsettling, the next story will make your skin crawl. Story 3. The Vanishing Family. I first heard about the house on the edge of town through a tattered newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, stuffed carelessly into the library archives. The headline was simple, almost mundane: "Family vanishes without a trace." But what followed in the small print was anything but ordinary. A father, mother, 2 children, all gone, leaving only their belongings behind, frozen in mid-motion, as if time itself had refused to move forward in that house. Curiosity drew me there one overcast afternoon. The house looked ordinary from the outside, a Victorian relic with peeling paint and sagging shutters. Yet the moment I stepped through the front door, the air shifted, heavy with something that wasn't just dust or decay. I felt it pressing against my chest, a quiet insistence that this was not a place meant for living or for being seen. The kitchen told the first story. Plates sat on the table, half-eaten meals turned cold, forks frozen mid-air. A cup of tea had left a dark ring on the table, steam long dissipated, yet somehow still sharp in memory. The living room held toys in strange positions, dolls stacked in corners facing the walls, a train set looping endlessly in a circle, tracks bent at impossible angles. I could almost hear faint laughter echoing in the silence, warped and distant. Then I noticed the photographs. Framed family portraits lined the hallway, each image slightly distorted. Faces seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Smiles stretching just a fraction too wide, eyes too dark, shadows pooling unnaturally in corners of the frame. I snapped a photo with my camera, hoping the lens would reveal clarity. But when I reviewed it later, the family appeared in positions they hadn't been when I looked. Closer, staring straight at me. I began to explore the bedrooms, heart hammering, fingers brushing against the peeling wallpaper. In the children's room, a journal lay open on the floor. Pages scrawled with desperate notes. They watch us. They won't let us leave. Don't go near the walls. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. Faint creaks, suggesting movement behind them. A rhythm in sync with my own pulse. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I found myself drawn deeper. Tracing the hallways, cataloging the remnants of lives interrupted. I couldn't shake the feeling that the family's disappearance was not confined to the past. There was a connection, subtle yet undeniable, threading through the empty rooms, through the distorted photographs, reaching outward. And as I lingered in the doorway, the faintest whisper tickled my ear, almost like a warning or an invitation. And yet, even knowing this, I couldn't stay away from the next house. Story 4. The Haunting Letter. I wasn't supposed to read it. I found the letter tucked between the pages of an old encyclopedia in my attic, yellowed and brittle. The handwriting looping and elegant but tinged with urgency. The envelope had no return address, no date, just a single name, mine. My heart thumped, a warning I foolishly ignored. The first lines sent a chill crawling up my spine. You will find this letter. And when you do, know that some things cannot be unseen. On the night you discover the attic, shadows will stretch beyond the light. My pulse quickened. How could this person, whoever they were, know? I hadn't even stepped into that room for years. As I read on, the predictions became unnervingly precise. A friend's minor accident, the sudden death of a neighbor, even details about my own life, events I had only recently experienced. Each sentence was a mirror, reflecting moments I couldn't dismiss as coincidence. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a prank, some twisted trick of fate. but the handwriting seemed to mock me, every word pressing against the inside of my skull, refusing to be ignored. I reread the letter countless times, tracing the curves of each letter, trying to find a pattern, something logical. The predictions were not all resolved. Some hinted at horrors yet to come, warnings dangling in the air, like spider threads I could not touch without risking my own collapse. The sense of being watched grew, subtle at first, then undeniable, like the house itself was breathing in tandem with the letter's threats. By the end, I felt a crushing weight of dread. Holding that fragile paper, I realized the danger wasn't just in what had been written. It was in knowing it. Forbidden knowledge, as they say, has a price. Each line I read tied me tighter to a chain I couldn't see, but could feel tugging at my mind. And for nights afterward, I could almost hear the ink whispering, echoing the things that had yet to come. If you thought letters were harmless, the next story will prove otherwise. Story 5. The Crying Portrait. It was a gift from an estate sale, a seemingly innocuous painting tucked behind a stack of dusty furniture in a dimly lit corner of the house. The label simply read, Eleanor Whitmore, 1892 to 1910. The eyes caught me first. Large, dark, impossibly lifelike. For days I convinced myself it was just a masterful painting, a trick of brushstrokes and shadow. But the night I saw the first tear, my skepticism shattered. I had been reading in the living room, the fire sputtering in the hearth, when a drop of liquid caught the candlelight. I froze. There it was, a single tear tracing down the pale cheek of Eleanor Whitmore. I blinked. Maybe it was condensation, maybe my imagination. But as the hours passed, more tears formed, one after another, glistening like wet glass. I found myself whispering apologies, asking questions I didn't expect answers to. What happened to you? I murmured, voice shaking, heart thudding like a drum in a silent cathedral. Over the next week, the portrait seemed to change subtly. Her gaze followed me, not with the stiffness of paint, but with a softness that hinted at awareness. I tried to rationalize. Low light, shadows, exhaustion. But the more I tried to explain it away, the more certain I became that the painting was not passive. Sometimes, when I thought no one was watching, I swore I saw her lips move ever so slightly, forming words I could not hear. I began leaving notes at the base of the frame, scribbled questions, tiny sketches, desperate attempts at communication. By the third night, the tears weren't random. They were responses. If I asked, "Are you here?" I would find them in pairs, lined perfectly, glistening beneath the flickering lamp. My disbelief waged a war with my fear. But every logical thought eroded under the weight of the uncanny presence. Then came the moment I cannot forget. I leaned closer, whispering, Do you know me? The air grew colder, heavier, and the eyes widened, not in paint, but in something impossibly alive. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, and when I dared to look again, the tears had stopped. But her gaze lingered, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the portrait was aware of me. By this point, I had begun to realize these stories weren't just tales, they were warnings. Story 6. The Midnight Doll. I never thought much of dolls. They were, to me, harmless relics of childhood. Until I met her. I found the doll in the corner of an abandoned guest room, tucked beneath a threadbare blanket, sitting perfectly upright on a rocking chair as if waiting. Her porcelain face was flawless, except for the eyes. Glass so dark, it felt like they could swallow the light. I laughed nervously. It's just a doll, I told myself, though the hair on my neck refused to lie. The first night, I heard it. The faintest creak of wood, like tiny footsteps across the floorboards. I chalked it up to the house settling, but when I returned to the room, the doll was no longer beneath the blanket. She had moved to the edge of the bed, rocking gently, staring at me. Okay, that's weird, I muttered aloud, half hoping a friend would tell me I was losing it. I asked my roommate about it the next day, trying to make light of it. You didn't put that doll there, did you? I joked. He froze, eyes wide. I swear I didn't touch it, he whispered, backing away. I don't want to be in that room. The humor evaporated instantly, leaving a hollow pit of dread in its place. By the third night, I realized she knew things. A photograph left on my desk would later appear at her feet. A name I'd muttered aloud, private, unspoken, was scrawled in dirt along the floorboard near her chair. I spoke to her sometimes, testing the boundaries. Do you mean me harm? I asked, voice shaking. The rocking paused, then resumed faster, almost impatiently. It was as if she was telling me, I know everything, and it doesn't matter if you believe it. The whispers began after that, soft, almost musical, curling around the edges of my ears when the house was silent. Secrets I hadn't shared, memories I hadn't voiced, details of moments too trivial to be noticed now echoed back to me through that porcelain mouth. Sleep became a challenge. Every creak of the floor, every shadow stretching across the room felt like her moving closer, waiting for the perfect moment to remind me she wasn't just a toy. I tried to get rid of her. Burning seemed too permanent, tossing her out too simple. But nothing worked. The doll returned each night, waiting, always watching. And no matter how much I tried to ignore her, I knew she was aware of me. And if you think toys can't hurt, wait until you meet the next visitor. Story 7. The Forgotten Cemetery. I stumbled upon the cemetery by accident, or so I told myself. A narrow path through the woods led me there, choked with weeds and fallen leaves. The air heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying foliage. The gravestones were cracked, toppled, and covered in moss. But some bore warnings etched deep into stone. Do not disturb the resting. Trespassers will regret. Words that seemed more like threats than memorials. The silence was complete, except for the faint rustle of wind through skeletal branches and the distant, unplaceable creak of something moving just beyond sight. I walked slowly, heart hammering, scanning the names and dates. Many graves belonged to children, others to families who vanished from local records. Lives cut short or erased entirely. Each stone seemed to hum with an unreadable urgency, a story clawing for attention. I knelt by one particular marker, a marble cross etched with a single word, watch. A chill crawled along my spine. It was impossible to shake the feeling that unseen eyes were following my every movement, that the shadows between the stones were alive and aware. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize the dread. Wind, imagination, echoes of the past. But the hair on my neck refused to lie. The forest around the cemetery was wrong. Sounds didn't match their source. Leaves rustled, yet no wind blew. An owl hooted from a place I couldn't see. A low, almost human sigh drifted through the trees. I realized, with creeping horror, that this was not just a cemetery. It was a boundary, a place where the ordinary world touched something far older, far more dangerous. As I turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the dense undergrowth. It didn't move like a human or animal. Its form was amorphous, a dark smear against the dying light. A soundless warning, or perhaps a curiosity, lingered in its presence. I didn't wait to find out which. I left quickly, glancing back only once, catching a hint of movement that vanished the instant I tried to focus. I walked away with a sense that the cemetery was not merely forgotten. It was waiting, patient, holding secrets that few were meant to uncover. I started to notice patterns in these hauntings. Story 8. The Whispering Woods. I had always laughed at local legends, the kind of stories meant to scare kids into staying on the trail. The Whispering Woods were no exception, until the night I found myself hopelessly lost beneath their gnarled, towering canopy. The sun had long disappeared, and the moonlight barely penetrated the dense foliage. That's when I heard it, the whispers. Faint at first, almost polite, like someone trying not to be overheard. Then louder, urgent, coaxing me deeper into the dark. This way. No, not that way. Follow me. The voice, or voices, slithered around the trunks of the trees, impossible to locate. I argued with myself, muttering darkly, "Great, now I'm going to die listening to the wind talk." But humor didn't help. The forest had other plans. Every path I thought I knew, twisted in impossible ways, leaves crunching under my feet, though I swore I hadn't stepped there before. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. When I glanced back, I swore I saw my own silhouette moving independently, drifting between trees, always just out of reach. I tried calling out, my voice shaking. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The whispers laughed, a high, hollow sound that sent my stomach churning. I realized too late that the woods weren't just haunted, they were aware. The trees themselves seemed to lean, closing in, guiding me towards some unseen, inevitable conclusion. At one point, I stumbled upon a clearing and froze. There, half buried in moss and dirt, was a familiar object, a toy I had seen in the attic weeks earlier. My pulse jumped. The woods, the doll, the attic. The connections were impossible, yet undeniable. Something was threading these horrors together, pulling me along, daring me to see where it would lead. Hours, or was it minutes, passed in a blur of fear and disorientation. I eventually found a narrow path that led out, the whispers fading like a bad dream. But their echo clung to my mind. The terror didn't end when I stepped back into the ordinary world. From the woods, the terror followed me home. Story 9. The house that shouldn't exist. Everything looked ordinary when I first saw the house. A modest two-story with white siding and flower boxes. The kind of home that blends perfectly into a quiet street. But the instant I stepped onto the porch, the air felt wrong, like the space itself was holding its breath. I brushed it off as imagination, until the door swung open before my hand even reached the handle. Inside, the house was immaculate. The scent of fresh bread, a flicker of sunlight through sheer curtains, everything suggested warmth and life. Yet the moment I turned the corner, I realized the rooms didn't obey logic. Hallways twisted impossibly. Doors led to spaces that shouldn't exist, and stairs curved in ways that made my head spin. I called out, "Hello!" But the only response was silence, broken by the occasional floorboard creak. I found a family in the living room, or what seemed like a family. They were smiling, frozen mid-action, like figures trapped in a photograph. I tried to speak to them. "Are you real?" My voice echoed strangely, distant and small, as if swallowed by the walls themselves. When I reached for the father, he vanished into thin air. A laugh, soft, disembodied, almost teasing, rippled through the room, and the remaining figures blinked out one by one, leaving me alone in a living space that seemed to shift with every heartbeat. I wandered, desperate for an exit, but the house had no interest in letting me leave. Each door led to another room, identical yet subtly wrong. Wallpaper patterns reversed, mirrors reflecting scenes I hadn't seen, shadows moving against the light. I realized this house wasn't just haunted, it was aware. It followed rules I couldn't understand, a pattern connecting every unnatural place I had encountered. The attic, the woods, the doll, the cemetery, everything tied together like a map I hadn't been meant to read. By the time I stumbled back onto the porch, gasping for air, my mind felt stretched thin, fragile. The house stood there quietly, innocent to anyone who might glance from the street, yet knowing more than I ever would. I shivered, unable to shake the feeling that it wasn't finished with me. But nothing prepared me for the last story. Story 10. The Endless Night. I woke to darkness thicker than anything I had ever known. The kind that presses against your chest and fills your ears with its weight. At first, I thought it was a Sierra storm outside, but the air was still, heavy with an unseen presence. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, familiar, yet twisted. The tall figure from the attic, the doll's glassy stare, the shifting rooms of the impossible house, even the eyes from Eleanor Whitmore's portrait. They were all here, converging, waiting. I ran, though I wasn't sure where. The landscape shifted beneath my feet, trees bent impossibly, hallways stretched into the distance, and walls I had known for years now trapped me. Whispers echoed, overlapping, each voice claiming to know me, each syllable tugging at memories I didn't want to revisit. I stumbled, heart hammering, and the ground beneath me seemed to open, revealing glimpses of the vanishing family, the phantom passenger, the forgotten cemetery, all frozen, all watching. I called out, desperate for a sign that this was real, that I could wake from a nightmare. But my voice was swallowed instantly, leaving only the soft, insidious laughter of the shadows. Every step I took led me deeper into the maze of horrors I thought I had catalogued and understood. The attic, the woods, the letters, the portrait, the doll, the houses, they weren't separate. They were one. A web of warnings stitched together by something older, patient, and aware of every choice I had made. Then I realized the truth. The stories never end. They wait, quietly, for the next witness to stumble, to see, to read, to hear. And now, I was caught in the endless night, a single observer, surrounded by horrors I could neither touch nor escape. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes, watching me, judging me, calculating how long I could survive before the shadows claimed me completely. I want to warn you, not just for me, but for anyone reading, listening, watching. The stories I've shared, they aren't past events, contained in dusty pages or fading photographs. They're alive. They are patient, and they are waiting for you. And that's when I understood. These aren't just stories. When I first told you I never believed in ghosts, I wasn't lying. But I was naive. I thought stories were just that. Stories. Tales to pass the time, warnings to children, mysteries to entertain. But after everything I've seen, after the attic, the woods, the houses, the shadows that watch, I understand now that some stories are far more than entertainment. They are warnings. And some truths are dangerous to know. I've shared 10 stories tonight, 10 glimpses into worlds that intersect with ours in ways we cannot comprehend. And yet, even with all I've uncovered, there are fragments I cannot explain, shadows I could not chase, whispers I still hear at the edges of my vision. The vanishing families, the endless nights, the eyes that follow me, they have not stopped. They wait, they watch, and now perhaps they are watching you too. I want you to think carefully about what you've just heard. Did you feel it? The subtle prickle along your neck, the hesitation when your eyes darted to a corner of the room. That is the world I've glimpsed. The world that exists just beyond the veil of ordinary life. And if you choose to look deeper, to search for answers or stories of your own, remember, curiosity comes at a price. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Some knowledge, once acquired, cannot be forgotten. I encourage you, no. I challenge you to share your experiences. Have you felt presences in your home when no one else was there? Have you heard whispers in the dark? Footsteps when no one walked? Send your stories into the night. Let them find others who understand the strange, the uncanny, the terrifying. The more we share, the more we acknowledge that we are not alone. And yet, perhaps that acknowledgement invites attention we are better off avoiding. Remember the attic from the first story, the doll from the sixth, the cemetery and the woods. These places were waiting, but they were not passive. They are part of something larger, a web of events and entities that stretches further than I can see or imagine. And for those who think this is all fiction, I promise you, it is not. These stories are alive, patient, persistent. So, as you settle tonight, in the quiet and the dark, listen carefully. Watch the corners of your room. Notice the shadows that linger a second too long. And consider this. Some of the secrets I have revealed are still out there, waiting for the next curious mind, the next unwary eye, the next person's foolish enough to stumble too close. I will leave you with this, because it is the only truth I can offer without inviting danger directly to your door. The stories never truly end. They wait, and sometimes, when you think you're alone, they step closer.